Politics. It's one of those topics one should never discuss in public. At least that's what I was taught. Maybe you were too. But that was a time before social media. It's now so easy and tempting to share our opinions, even if that means arguing and name-calling supposed loved ones and strangers alike. The no politics policy was also a time before the advent of online dating. This technology enables love seekers to cast a wide geographic net to meet potential partners. We want to know what they look like, if they prefer the beach over the mountains, and more, we want to know political leanings, especially for older. I'm Laura Stassi, host of the podcast Dating While Gray. A study by the Pew Research Center found online daters 50 and older are more likely than younger daters to say it's very important a person's profile include political affiliation. Sure, there were divisions before the 2016 clash between Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton. But the gap seems to have grown even wider, and many Americans who have previously been neutral or uninterested now feel like they really need to choose a side. According to Pew, singles looking for dating partners are outright rejecting anyone who's chosen the other side.
So I'd like to think that I'm not a partisan. And in my particular opinion right now is that, there's Democrat, Republican, then there's crazy.
That's a psychotherapist and social worker we're calling Lynn. She describes herself as open-minded, even while reflexively passing on conservative dating profiles. But then Lynn meets one of her neighbors, which leads her to question how tolerant she actually is.
I'm one of the few people in my neighborhood who doesn't own a dog, and I'm absolutely convinced that the only way to make friends in my neighborhood is if you own a dog. Mm-hmm. So when I go for a walk around my neighborhood, I make it a point to say hi to the dogs. And this guy had a dog that was the same breed of dog that I grew up with, and I hadn't seen one like that. So I didn't see the person, I just saw the dog. And then I asked him about his dog, and he turned around and we just started talking, and I asked him, he had some insignia on his cap, and I asked him about it, and it turned out we were both in the same field. For one thing. Just like, isn't that interesting?
Yeah.
Right? He had served time in the military, and I was an Army brat, and my daughter was in the same branch of service that he was. Like, there was one thing after another, after another. And I thought to myself, oh, I'm sure he's married, he has to be. And I looked, and I didn't see a wedding ring or anything. And then he said something about his daughters. I said, so you live with your daughters? He said, no, I live alone. And he stressed, I live alone. And I thought, we'll get this. You have to talk in code, right? So I said, yeah, I live by myself over there, and I pointed, and we kept talking for a while. And I said, well, it was really nice to meet you. And I was the one who said, would you like to get together for coffee sometime? He said, that'd be great. I'd love that.
Oh, good for you.
And I said, well, how do I get in touch with you? And he said, he started to reach into his shirt. He said, well, I don't have a card, and I don't carry my cell phone on walks. And I didn't either. So he told me his name, which was an easy to remember name. And he said, just go Google me. He told me the name of his company and that kind of thing. So I went home, I thought, is there a time limit? Is it too fast to do this? What do I do? So I came home and I Googled his name. I found his email, and then I thought, well, I'm going to just take just to look at his Facebook page, and it said conservative. And I thought, of course, this was too good to be true. And I talked to him for 20 minutes, and he was really a nice guy, like a nice guy.
And that surprised you.
Yeah. Yes, it was like, how can you be a conservative and a nice guy? And that's where I started thinking about, I just thought God had a sense of humor, because if I go on a dating site, I don't look at people like that. And so if I'd seen him on a dating site, I would have just swiped left. And this was a case of, I don't know what it means. He used to work with people with disabilities. I mean, he has a dog. He's all this stuff like that. And I thought, this is a conundrum. I'm not one of those people that thought I would never date somebody who voted for somebody different or was a different political party. It depends on who the person was. Like if who they voted for was reflective of their intelligence and their values versus that I disagreed with their values, then that would be a problem. But I would never just dislike somebody because of their color or their party or something like that. But these days, when I see conservative, I'm like, I go crazy.
Okay, so you know he's a conservative, and you know he's very nice, and you know he's smart, which kind of surprised you.
We've had 2 coffee dates, and I was sitting there thinking he was going to judge me, because in my mind, conservatives are all judgmental. I was sitting there thinking this is all going really nicely, but what's going to happen when he finds out I'm a liberal? I decided I had to broach the subject. I said, well, when I went to look up your name, I did notice that you were conservative on your Facebook page. And I said, I want to out myself right now that I'm probably in the category of, liberal or progressive. We started talking about it. He was raised by Truman Democrats in the Midwest. And he told me that he had voted for McGovern and he was a Democrat. And I said, I would be really fascinated to know how a McGovern Democrat gets to be a conservative. And I said, I don't have time now, but I would really, I would really like that. He actually said to me in a text message, he said something about it's uncanny how much we have in common, except for our political worldview.
He's definitely right, but is he right?
That's a great question. I mean, this is going to be a total experiment.
Lynn made a new friend, but ultimately the neighbor was not a love connection. She tells me their red-blue divide isn't really an issue. It's more a general lack of momentum. This real-life encounter has Lynn rethinking her online dating parameters. Still, she's finding it hard to give a chance to self-described red voters. That's not the experience of a widow named Vicky. Like Lynn, Vicky tends to lean left, but she agrees to a blind date with her friend's friend, Peter. He's divorced and leans right. In fact, conservative politics is Peter's bread and butter. I talked with Vicky and Peter around Thanksgiving in 2020. Joe Biden had won the election. Then President Trump was contesting it. And I wanted to hear how Vicky and Peter are navigating any political tensions in their personal life since meeting about a year after the 2016 race.
Vicky and I agreed to meet for drinks at a place that was convenient for both of us. And we must have talked for 2-3 hours.
3 hours, yeah.
And I thought she was charming, delightful, and entertaining and gorgeous. Well, I mean, that goes without saying. It's radio, so you can't see, but trust me. Trust me on this one. But I didn't think she was interested in me. And this is actually something we discussed the other day. How could you know after one encounter whether or not it's something you want to pursue? And having been on the online thing and having the coffees and the dinners, I know easily how quickly people can make up their minds. No, this is not someone I want to be with. And I thought she was entertained, but that she was not interested in another date. And I was very disappointed. And then, in saying goodbye, she made it clear that she wanted me to ask her out again. So I was very pleased.
I didn't have any idea if it would go anywhere. I mean, it was 2 hours of conversation. I'm in sales. I can talk to a wall if I need to. So I had a lovely evening. I enjoyed the company, but I didn't know enough to say whether or not this was someone I wanted to have a serious relationship with or entertain anything other than, another evening out and let's, get to know each other. One of the unfortunate factors of dating after loss is you don't really know how to date, and I think everybody's in that same boat. I mean, whether it's a divorce or a death, it's probably been a very long time at our age since anybody's been dating. So we really don't know how to do it.
And I was never any good at it to begin with. I got married at 23.
To me, it was just like, I found him interesting. We had great conversation. And I was like, I'd like to see him again. I don't know if I wanted to become anything other than just go out again, but I didn't know I was supposed to know that yet.
So before you went out with him, did you know what he does for a living?
Yeah. Well, yeah, that was part of...
That's actually how I knew our mutual friend.
Were there any red flags?
My parents are very involved in politics, and I don't necessarily share theirs. My husband had very strong opinions, and I didn't necessarily share his. So I did notice in the online dating profiles for so many people, they would just be adamant, no Trumpers, no this, no that. If you're a Trumper, don't even bother. If you don't believe in the patriotism of Trump, don't bother. I'm like, how has this become such a criteria for people? Differing opinions, one, they make for much more interesting conversation. And two, I think that's kind of how the country works. People have differing opinions. And if we all live in this world where we only hear the same opinion, then I don't think it becomes very productive. And this particular president has been a little bit more polarizing than others, a lot more. And it comes into play with the two of us often. I mean, we have some rather spirited conversations, but at the end of the day, it's a conversation. And as much as I would like to change his perspective, I know I'm not going to. He has held that long, well before he met me. And I'm comforted a little bit in that there's logic and rationale behind it. It's not the blind, I'm going to wave my flag and do it without questioning or without introspection. And I think that makes it really important. I think if he was somebody out there that was just blindly waving the flag, I don't know that we would have made it.
First of all, I'm enormously patient. Coming up in my field, and even before that, I used to do politics before I opined on them for a living. And I used to think that my job was to convince everybody else that I was right, they were wrong, and to force an agreement from them. And then one day, someone who I had great respect for said that I needed to understand that people have a right to be wrong. And what he meant was, in a robust, vibrant American democracy, you don't want everyone thinking the same thing, and people are entitled to their own opinions. From my perspective, it might be wrong. From their perspective, it's right, but they have the right to their opinion. And so it dawned on me that really what my job was to present a case for a particular candidate, a particular issue, a particular legal opinion, whatever it might be, with reason and facts as best I possibly could, and hopefully persuade someone who either had not yet made up their mind or who was aligned along a different axis that in fact I was correct. And I raised my children that way, that you have a right to your own opinions, you don't have a right to your own facts.
That's interesting you say that, because I feel like from what I'm hearing, and I'm sort of poking to be devil's advocate, you have a right to your own opinion, but you don't have a right to your own facts. There are a lot of Republicans who could not vote for President Trump for this time around because there seems to be alternative facts are okay.
Well, alternative facts is a legal term that's legitimate. When you're in a jury trial and one advocate will ask the jury to consider a certain set of facts, the opposing counsel may have an alternative set of facts that they would like considered by the jury. Alternative facts, as it was taken and manipulated after Kellyanne Conway used the phrase, is a euphemism for making things up.
Well, because too often in this political cycle, that's a lot what it's felt like, is it that a lot of things, because the facts are not shared, if there are alternative facts, it would be really useful if they could be shared because we don't see them. And I don't really want to get into a whole thing about the media, but because the alternative facts are not shared, it feels like outright made up statements.
I will concede that that's true, that there have been statements made by the president and by people who work for the president that cannot be backed up factually. But I will also say that that's not unusual. And so that's some of the things that we talk about and where we find common ground, even though we may differ politically, is trying to keep the conversation focused on facts.
Is there some topic that you all just try to come to an agreement on and cannot?
I don't think we have to agree.
Yeah, I don't think there's many that we agree on.
I love Vicky and I respect her, and I think that she doesn't give herself enough credit for the information that she has stored in her brain. She says that I win on the fact points, but I don't have to agree with her, and she doesn't have to agree with me for us to have a successful relationship.
I think there's a couple of topics that, I won't even parse, won't go down the path, because I know that it will become, because it crosses beyond the political divide, like say abortion for one. We've had a couple of conversations about it. We have very differing opinions about that. And it is both a political and a religious component for him. And I'm like, okay, you know what? I'm not going to go down that path. I know I'm never changing his mind on that one ever. I can't imagine any scenario in which he would be in support of it. And, that's fine. You do you. But I know that, that's not, because that's such an emotional landmine. There's no point in going down that one.
Are there some issues that you think have become politicized over the years that should not be political? It should be humane.
Oh, yeah. Yes. There are all kinds of things in the political arena that don't belong there.
Abortion.
Well, again, we may disagree on that, but there's too much politics. We're supposed to be a self-governing people. The founders determined that we were sovereign, the people were sovereign. That's why the Constitution begins, "We the people." That is a important idea. It was a revolutionary idea at the time. It's the idea that lots of other parts of the world seek at some point to emulate. But that doesn't mean that every conversation has to be political. It also doesn't mean you have to win every conversation. And one of the things that bothers me about my industry is that they now, rather than cover the different sides of a story, they cover politics like they cover sports because it's easy. This team is ahead, this team is behind, bases loaded, 2 strikes. This is all easy to write about, and then we can go have drinks or play golf. But if you want to write about Joe Biden's healthcare plan, you have to read Joe Biden's healthcare plan. And I don't recommend that anybody, unless you have insomnia, because it will just put you right out, as will most public policy documents. But it's hard to do. But what that does is it moves politics into the who's ahead, who's behind, who won, who lost matrix, away from the need to find consensus that most all of us can agree about. The founders put so many checks and balances into the federal system and into the federalism that they gave us.
But it sure feels like a lot of that's gone away.
There are assaults on it because some people aren't getting what they want quickly enough.
All right, so I want to talk about things that clearly you're on one side.
Benny?
I assume you voted for 2 different candidates.
Yeah.
What is it about your relationship that invigorates you, inspires you?
I think it's the mutual respect. I think that was something that was very important to me in my marriage. Partnership and respect and friendship, I think, are 3 baselines that if you don't have those 3, you don't have a hope of anything more. For a future, for the romantic side, you have to have those 3 before the rest can become a possibility.
I think Vicky's totally amazing. And I consider myself lucky that she cares for me as much as she does. That's a new feeling for me. That's certainly part of it. And this may not be the answer that you're looking for, but I think that there's a mutual recognition that our relationship is the most important thing, that the politics, the economics, the friendships she has that she brings to the table, the friendships that I have that are brought to the table, all of those are secondary to the relationship itself. And that if we get out of sorts on something, that the need for reconciliation is more important than the need for being right. That there's nothing that is so important, or at least that we have encountered so far, that is so important that the need to be right overcomes our ability to coexist as partners in our universe where we're both generally pulling in the same direction.
Is there anything else I need to know? Is there anything else you want to say to each other?
I hate your politics, but I love you. I don't hate them. I don't hate them.
Okay, that's.
I disagree with your politics, but I love you.
That's not the way I would have put it. I'm just going to say I love you, and I'm very lucky to have you in my life.
Vicki and Peter are still together. In fact, they're now engaged. They've looked for a place to buy together, but haven't had any luck. So for now, they're maintaining separate homes, which suits both of them. Vicki wrote in an email that, quote, "Paperwork or not, we've built an incredible and growing family. In the time we've spent together, we've had 3 children get married and watched 2 become parents. There's a 3rd grandchild on the way." Vicki and Peter also, quote, "continue to treat one another with love, care, and respect, acknowledging our differences and celebrating our commonalities. We learn from each other every day." I have to say, I really admire that, and I'm speaking as someone who's lately done a lot of Facebook unfollowing and unfriending. I don't even want to get into it. How do we engage in politically charged conversations, especially with loved ones?
One tip is that there have to be many conversations, not one. This is not a conversation about where you plant the flag, and that's it.
That's psychotherapist Ken Page. We'll hear more from him coming up next. This is Love Across the Divide from Dating While Gray. I'm Laura Stassi, and this is Love Across the Divide from Dating While Gray. Have you noticed how certain words become labels, sometimes worn proudly, sometimes weaponized? Like feminist. It's a noun, a person who believes women should have the same political, social, and economic rights that men have. Now, I admit, when I started dating after divorce, I was uncomfortable embracing the term, because I thought feminist might also mean a total rejection of gender dating expectations. I wasn't ready to give that all up. I talked about this with Steve, a retired university professor in Wisconsin. Steve is a feminist, and he shared this experience when he started dating after his wife died.
There's one, it was maybe my second or my third first date with a woman. And, we had a beer and tea or something. We talked for a couple hours, and afterwards we said, let's get together. So I texted her at one point shortly afterwards, said, that I enjoyed everything. And I said, I haven't dated for over 3 decades. I'm still kind of new to this, and I'm, still trying to figure out the rules and everything else. And her reply was something like, okay, here's how it works. Boy asks girl out to dinner, boy pays, then this happens a couple times, then girl invites boy to her apartment, makes dinner for him, and then it proceeds from there. And then I wrote back and I said, that might be one way to do it, but I said, I'm a feminist, and so I don't like to sort of follow gender rules, so maybe it'll be a little different with us. And then about 2 hours before the date was supposed to happen, I get a text from her saying, I've had a long day at work. I'm really kind of tired. Maybe we can do this some other time. So I think it was the fact that I responded that way that she cut off the date. And then about 2 months later, we did get back together to have a date. We had a couple walking dates. This was during COVID. And during those, she asked me a question. She said, when you said you were a feminist after our first date, I was curious about that. Does that mean you have more feminine personality characteristics than masculine? And I thought to myself, I'm in my late 60s and it's 2020. Do I really have to explain to a woman in her 60s what feminism is?
Weird is another word that's in the political arena. Democratic VP candidate Tim Walz seems to have started the trend. He used it pejoratively to describe GOP policies. But in Austin, Texas, being weird has been a good thing since the year 2000. That's when a caller made a donation to their local public radio station, saying it was to keep Austin weird. Now the slogan is all over the city, on bumper stickers, t-shirts, you name it. Then there's woke. I didn't realize how this word had been misconstrued until I asked Dating While Gray listeners to fill out an audience survey. One of the respondents described herself as a, quote, adult human female seeking non-woke heterosexual adult male. I put out a call out asking show listeners their thoughts about the word woke.
Hey, Laura. To me, woke means being aware or sensitive to injustices. Those injustices are usually racial, sexual, gender, whatever.
I think that the word woke has been taken to a place that it shouldn't have gone. People are using it as a put down, something negative. It's been politicized, and it's not good, period.
Yeah, it's fraught, right? I understand the whole, when woke was a good term, right? And now it's become a pejorative term, wielded by the right, to batter the left. And I believe in the woke principles. I believe that people who are woke are really trying to do the right thing by every group in society.
Being woke is more about recognizing, understanding, being aware of discrimination, prejudice, racism, and any other injustice in the world. And by that definition, everyone should be woke. But we know that's not going to happen.
I actually loathe the label because it oversimplifies some very complex concepts with a single word. It's been my observation that right-wingers love simplifying things with a single label. This makes it easier to denigrate complex ideas in one broad stroke rather than engage in discussion.
I don't think anybody would describe me as particularly woke. I'm a kind of 64-year-old guy who's been liberal all my life, a little bit of a Marxist.
Personally, I think it's a good thing to be woke.
I really want to believe, and I do believe, that people on the right and left are not as far apart as they've been polarized by the media. And that if a woke person had a chance to explain to a very conservative person, here's what I believe in and why, that they could have a civil dialogue and maybe even find a lot of common ground in that Venn diagram of, beliefs and ideologies.
Thank you, callers. I especially like that final comment about the Venn diagram and finding common ground. I'm reminded of the expression, politics makes strange bedfellows. It means a shared political interest can bring people together when they otherwise have nothing in common. What's the expression for the twist? People coming together who may have things in common other than their politics. It doesn't seem like a lot of us want to explore that. According to a 2020 Pew Research report, more than 70% of single Democrats would not consider dating someone who voted for Donald Trump. As for Republicans, 47% said they would not date a Hillary Clinton voter. An Economist YouGov poll says an equal number of Democrats and Republicans, 38%, would feel somewhat or very upset if their child entered into a politically mixed marriage. And how about this from a study conducted in 2023? Half of all respondents would break up with their romantic partner if they switched loyalties. In other words, political affiliations are leading us to not only reject potential dating partners, but also to reject the romantic partners we already have. For advice, I turned to Ken Page. He's the author of Deeper Dating, How to Drop the Games of Seduction and Discover the Power of Intimacy. Ken's also a relationship coach and a psychotherapist.
But my dream was always to be a psychotherapist. I remember being 10 years old on the subway reading a book about So You Want to Be a Psychiatrist. And like just thinking, oh my God, what a privilege that would be to hear people's inside stories.
So I'd like to ask you a true or false question, and the answer is your opinion. True or false? Two people need to be aligned politically to have a deep connection and strong romantic bond.
False.
False. Okay.
Yeah.
Why?
With a lot of like rich stuff around that, and not always false. So, of course it's not black and white, but in Venezuela there are these plateaus that are called tepuis. And what they are these kind of giant mountains, and they're separate. So each tepui develops its own entire ecosystem that's unlike other ecosystems in the entire world. We are kind of like that. And especially those of us who found love later, we have developed our entire ecosystems, and everybody's ecosystem. What we need to survive is different. What matters to us, what we need to protect is different. It's kind of universal in some ways, but like fingerprints, maybe universal, but really, really different. And so we are all so profoundly different. And this is one of the jarring but exciting things about love. Is that each of us is our own tepui. We are our own ecosystem. We are our own language. And in fact, the erotic and the romantic need difference to be able to thrive and survive. If it's pure homogeneity, the excitement disappears. But how to develop the language of difference. I look at my husband sometimes and I think, how is it possible that you feel that way? How is it humanly conceivable that you feel that way? You're someone I love. You're someone I respect. What? That doesn't happen that often, but it can happen. And then, we have to have dialogue. And at those places where he's so profoundly different from me, both of us have different survival mechanisms that are clicking in and activating for us. And I need to understand what his are, and he needs to understand mine.
Let's just take two political parties, the Republicans and the Democrats. And I know there's a huge spectrum, but it feels like people are now assigning party beliefs to values. And so how can two people who may have different values get along?
If the values that differ are around honesty and integrity, forget it. It's not going to work. Because that's a value that is a non-negotiable. A commitment to goodness, a commitment to the relationship. Those are values that it's just not going to work if those values are not in alignment. If your values that connect with your political views involve hate and prejudice, there's going to be a big problem if the other person doesn't share those hates and prejudices. I think that's a very, very real thing.
I'm sorry, I don't mean to laugh, but sharing a hate sounds so awful, doesn't it? I share your same hate.
Yes, right. They wouldn't say it that way, but that's so much of what people believe and do. The bottom line is this. There has to be a language for bridging difference. There has to be a communication process that couples have to help them bridge difference. And, especially around differences in political opinions, it's just so highly charged. So sometimes, it's impossible to get over that divide, and it's not a good idea. But if there is shared goodness, if there's a shared commitment to goodness, a shared commitment toward human values, a shared commitment toward honesty and caring, and toward the relationship, it's kind of a different story, and a lot of gaps can be bridged. Does it take skill? Does it take work? Yeah, it sure as hell does.
I think some other people would say it's not that the values are different, it's the expression of the values. And so getting back to what you said about communication, maybe it's a matter of being able to communicate what a certain political aspect or a certain issue on the table, what that means to you, and being able to I don't know, how would you ask questions about it? You talked about bridging a communication gap.
You brought up two different points that I think are really valuable in what you said. You said it's about how we express it. I just want to really underscore that. That's huge. And then you asked about how do we do that. But I just want to really underscore that first point, because that's like almost everything is how we express it.
I always tell people I speak in rough draft. So I appreciate that you were able to listen to what I said and get that. So thank you for that.
Oh yeah. No, that was great. That was great. That wasn't such rough draft.
So how do we communicate, or the bridges? How do we cross the divide?
So I'm going to start off with a really easy one, which is what they say in 12-step programs. Say what you mean what you say, and don't say it mean. And that like really, really captures a lot. Say what you mean means find the words that really capture the truth of what you want to say. Don't weaponize your words. Don't create words to get a manipulative effect that aren't the true words of what your experience is at the time. And then don't say it mean, be kind, which, those are very simple, but they're really, really hard. The other thing I'm going to say is that I love and refer to often the work of Harville Hendricks and Helen LaKelly Hunt, who are the founders of Imago Therapy. And Imago Therapy teaches a method for couples to communicate, which is demanding, and it's absolutely incredible. Very, very powerful techniques. And those techniques involve you sit across from each other. One person speaks, the other person listens, but you very frequently interrupts and says, stop, let me see if I got that right. Repeats it back. Then the other person and says, did I get that right? And often the other person's going to say, well, almost, but, and that nuance, it becomes hugely important. And then the person says, is there more? Which is the most beautiful, inviting question. And then the person says, yeah, and they say more, and they begin to really express what's in their heart. There's two layers. There's the layer of protection, like, am I going to be heard? I better kind of fling out these arrows and hope that they get heard. And then there's a layer underneath. It's the layer of the heart. It's the layer of our vulnerability, our humanity. That is tender stuff. And we don't show that often that easily. So that question, did I get this right? And then is there more? Immediately just opens up so much possibility for humanity. Then you kind of take the whole thing and you say the magic words. It makes sense you feel that way because, and you actually do that. You've got your hand on your own map of the world. You're not going to take your hand off that map, but the other person has their own map of the world. You rest your hand on their map and speak to the truth and the validity of it. Even though it's so counterintuitive to do that, then the other person feels heard. And then they get to tell you the deeper meaning of that to them.
I was going to say, are you not supposed to say that unless you actually feel it? So you're supposed to keep asking questions until it does make sense to you that the other person feels that way.
Right. You may not agree, but you find the way, because they're not lying, that it makes sense to them. It makes sense to them given the whole construct of their lives. That's what you say yes to. You don't have to feel the same way. And then you're going to get your turn to do the reverse. But the next question is, how does that relate to what you experienced growing up, to your own pains, to your own needs? How does that relate to the deepest parts of you? So in all of our, let's say there's a couple with different political views, let's say fiercely different political views, okay? They are fiercely protecting and trying to honor some part of them that really does matter that much. That's the piece that ultimately needs to be heard.
I don't know. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist, but just in talking to a lot of people, I think there's a lot of fear around politics these days. I have to say, I think a lot of it is justified, and I don't think we can understand other people's fears if we're not walking in their shoes. I'm not a gay person. So maybe, if I'm not an empathetic person, maybe I can't understand that fear.
Right. And then you would need to hear it from me. You would need to hear my experiences as a dad with a child growing up in a school that honored our family, and how horrifying it would have been to not have that for my child and for me. There would have to be dialogue. There would have to be understanding. But the point that you raised is a really great one. And I think even like that could be an instrument and a tool. Let's say you're in a relationship with someone who has really deeply different political views, and they're fiercely held views. What is the fear there? What's that fierceness about? What's the fear? It's almost like any time that happens, both parties need to hear what the fear is, because that's the deeper issue, is what that fear is. What's the value that is so basic to them that feels like it's being stepped on by the other party?
Yeah.
And then we all have to do some real looking at ourselves, because prejudice, homophobia, sexism, racism are inculcated in all of us. And no matter what your party is, as a human being, it's your job to deconstruct that. It just is.
Yeah. Our job as a human.
Yeah, our job as a human, no matter which party or which side you're on. We don't get to have an excuse for not doing that. And all of us are responsible, not just Democrats, not just Republicans. We are all responsible for doing that hard, humbling deconstruction work of seeing where we hold prejudices, where we other people.
We're talking a lot about couples who might have differences, and I'm hearing from a lot of older daters who say they automatically swipe left on someone, meaning they, reject them, if they identify as a political opposite. Is this a good idea? Because in theory, you're not wasting anybody's time. You believe this. I don't believe this. Let's not even go down any kind of road to trying to have a relationship.
Yeah. I mean, the way I think of that is how polarized are the two people. If they're extremely polarized, it's probably not a good idea. But if there's some flexibility there, if they're kind of allergic to extremes, if they want to find a common ground, then I think it's worth a try. It's really worth a try. If that's impossible, then that's impossible. And, unfortunately, the parties have gotten kind of polarized in a way that it's easy to associate each party with certain very strong political views.
And negativity.
If you're on the other side. Yeah. But, is the person willing? And I think that's the bottom line question. Because let's even say that the person you meet is highly polarized around their political party. But in other areas of their life, they are generous, they are thoughtful, they're really willing to listen to your side of the experience. They can make space. They're not rigid and held in that kind of very primitive, defensive way. In other areas of their life, there could be room. There could be maybe lots of room for connection. I think that's often really worth finding out.
I like that, because if you read some of the studies, they say that actually most Americans identify as moderate. And there comes a time where we feel like we have to pick a side, but that maybe a lot of us are more alike than we are different.
In a world that sculpts complete polarization, you're either one or the other. You're saying that the moderates are getting muddied, that it's getting confused, that they are not articulated and they're not clear. So that's a really, really important point, is like, are we being pushed to sides when actually we're more committed to hearing both sides?
But at the end of the day, or come election day, we do have to choose a side.
Right. There's all these people that don't vote, right? A huge percentage of America doesn't vote. And part of that is, and I just want to acknowledge, there's the moderate population, and then there's the I'm sick of both sides population. So there might be room to meet in that as well.
Let's say there's an older couple who have gotten together, and one of the very first, hurdles they have to overcome is something kind of rocks them. For example, when you first met me, I introduced you to my son, and my son now wants to transition, and you have a problem with that. I guess what I'm looking for are tips to help ease difficult conversations when we're potentially on two different sides of an issue.
Yeah, one tip is that there have to be many conversations, not one. This is not a conversation about where you plant the flag, and that's it. This is a series of conversations where both parties learn and grow. I'm going to share a story. A client of mine knew that she wanted to have a kid, met a guy, really, they fell deeply, deeply in love. And one day, the guy came to her and was just devastated. And he said, I have to end this because I know I don't want to have a kid. And I love you. I love you. I would want a whole life with you. He was devastated. She was devastated. But they had really been clear about where their flag was planted. Well, a long time later, she said, I just want to call him. She called him. They had a series of countless conversations. And they came to a decision together, which was a beautiful decision that worked for both of them. I don't even want to say what it was because it doesn't matter which side they landed on. But they never would have done that if they trusted the original flag planting. They didn't. They questioned it. They talked and they said it's more important for us at this point to meet as human beings who care deeply about each other. That's a really hard journey. So that's one thing I want to say is remember, this is not one plant the flag conversation if you really care. It is a series of ongoing conversations where you listen to each other and hear and also shift and change and soften.
Shift and change and soften. I like that.
Yeah.
And, I think speaking as an older woman who was married for a long time and then got divorced, I think there's a lot of coming into your own that you experience. And so maybe when you're about to embark on a new relationship, you might have a lot of cautiousness about it. Like, I don't want to lose myself again, or I just found myself. I'm not going to, give up anything. However, I think to be the most mature, we have to do what you just said. I mean, there's no harm in having open conversations about things, and maybe we do change our minds again.
Exactly. So true. And I think that when you confront a partner or a potential date and they are hardened about their political views, which is very understandable. But let's say you encounter that hardened quality, you're experiencing a hardness from them, not a softness, not an openness, not a humanity. And then there's a bristling reaction to that isn't only due to political differences. It's different. It's due to a human experience of the person in front of me just froze up, got cold, got defensive, and you feel that in your nervous system. So, and you think, yeah, that's just our political differences. It's more than that. They have stepped away from their humanity and you are stepping away from yours at that time. So I think that thing of if you can encounter someone with deeply different views, but they stay connected, they don't start seeing you as an enemy. They keep seeing your humanity. That makes a really big difference. And it's hard to do when your deepest values feel like they're being threatened.
Yes. And when your deepest values feel like they're being threatened, I think that encapsulates how a lot of people are feeling right now on both sides. So it's, troubling times.
I really, really do want to speak about the universality of this. A friend of mine went to see a couples therapist who said to him, you are going to spend the rest of your life together, you and your husband, learning a new language. And the language is their language. And it's a different language, even though it looks the same. And I think that captures so much of the truth of intimate relationships, this bewildering space where you meet a wall. Harville Hendrix, again, said it so brilliantly. This is what he said. He said, there comes a time in a relationship where the thing you most need from your partner is the thing they're least able to give you. And that is not the end of love. That is the beginning of conscious love. because it is at that point that you need to build a bridge that seems unbuildable at the moment. But because there's so much love there, because there's so much shared connection there, that bridge can be built. It might take a lot of time. It might take couples therapy, and I'm a big proponent of couples therapy. If you're hitting any point in any arena, in the bedroom, at the voting booth, that really feels really difficult, and you love your partner and you want to make it work, get help. Get help.
That's psychotherapist Ken Page, author of Deeper Dating. After listening to this show, maybe you're still firmly entrenched in your particular political camp, and you have no desire to connect romantically with someone in the other camp. Nothing wrong with that, as long as we all strive to not demonize or stereotype each other. Here's a final thought from Vicky, who's successfully navigating romantic partnership with her political opposite, Peter. Vicky wrote this about the 2024 presidential election. Whatever the outcome, we are hopeful that the path forward for our country includes more people who are willing to look for the good in others, can treat their differences with respect, and seek to find understanding rather than react with violence, vitriol, and bitterness. Thanks, Vicky. Words to live by as we all get out the vote. This is a Dating While Gray special with audio production and mix by Steve Lack Audio. For more, check out datingwhilegray.com. That's where you'll find the latest podcast episode, bonus content, and links to send questions, comments, tips, and true stories through email and voicemail. I love hearing from you. I'm Laura Stassi. Thanks for listening. Love Across the Divide is distributed by APM, American Public Media.